I set the cardboard box down on the HR conference table and watched them watch me. 3 sets of eyes tracked every move like I might stuff company secrets in my jacket or try to torch the place on my way out. Kelly from HR cleared her throat and gestured to the open flaps. "Dean," she said, voice clinical, "I'll need to verify the contents before you leave the premises." I didn't argue. I just pulled open the box. One framed photo of my wife and son. A few legal pads filled with half-written compliance protocols. A USB drive in a plastic bag sealed, labeled, "Personal Backup." 2 pens. That was it. 14 years in corporate compliance, reduced to what I could carry in one arm. My name is Dean Whitaker. I'm 42. Until about 10 minutes ago, I was the senior vendor compliance manager for Wexler and Drake Manufacturing. My job was simple on paper. Keep the company out of legal trouble. Make sure every vendor contract had the right indemnity language. Ensure onboarding was airtight, termination procedures clean, audits passable. In practice, it was a firewall. A thankless, tedious firewall. One that no one noticed unless it failed. When it failed, people like me took the blame. Today wasn't about failure, though. Not mina. "Dean, I'm going to need your badge," Kelly said. I took it off slowly, handing it over like I was offering an organ. The red plastic felt sticky from sweat. She nodded gravely, set it on top of the pile of exit forms, and gave me the practiced HR smile that says, "This isn't personal." They always say that. It had been personal for them the second I started updating my resume. That's what they called disloyal. I hadn't planned to leave, honestly, but a man can only hear "next quarter" so many times before he starts thinking about his mortgage. I'd spent 5 years politely pointing out I was 22% below market rate, that the industry had shifted, that the compliance workload had doubled with new vendor audits and onboarding standards. 5 years hearing that now wasn't the time, while senior management collected quarterly bonuses. And when I finally took a call from a recruiter on my lunch break, they acted like I'd spit on the company flag. They didn't even give me the dignity of 2 weeks. Effective immediately, Marcus, the COO, had said, with all the warmth of a guillotine blade. Company policy, apparently. "Once you're looking elsewhere, you're a liability." He handed me the exit package across the table like he was dealing poker. 3-month severance. Standard NDA. A non-compete that was unenforceable in our state but designed to scare anyone who didn't know better. I signed where they told me. Kelly had sat in the corner for that meeting too, taking notes like a courtroom stenographer. She cleared her throat again. "Any other items on your desk?" "No," I said. "Laptop and phone, already turned in." She checked her list, put a big check mark next to my name. It struck me as funny, in a cold way. 14 years, reduced to a checklist. I looked at the door. The security guard posted there wasn't even pretending to be subtle. Big guy. Friendly enough last week, when I'd brought donuts for the front desk staff. Now he wouldn't meet my eyes. I gave Kelly a tight smile. "Anything else?" She hesitated. "Marcus did ask me to remind you that the company expects confidentiality, especially around vendor contracts." I almost laughed. They'd fired me for looking at other jobs. But now they were worried I might talk about the onboarding protocols I wrote. That was the thing they didn't realize yet. They thought this was just about me wanting a raise. They hadn't remembered Clause 4.7. Symbolic objects scattered in my head as I closed the box. The vendor onboarding checklist, with my initials in the margin. The resignation letter they refused to let me submit. The thumb drive they'd insisted on examining, not realizing it was just family photos and the final draft of my compliance Bible. The legal email chain I'd printed last night, folded neatly in my jacket pocket. I wasn't planning sabotage. I wasn't planning anything at all. I'd planned this years ago, without knowing it. Clause 4.7 wasn't a trap. It was a failsafe. Kelly stood awkwardly, glancing at the guard. "I'll walk you out now." "Of course," I said. I picked up the box. No anger, no outburst, just a quiet acknowledgement that this was how they wanted it to end. As we moved down the hallway, the junior analysts tried not to stare. They'd all heard. Word traveled fast in a place like this. Compliance walked out. Guess he was job hunting. Company can't trust disloyal employees. They didn't know about the vendor. They didn't know about the clause. They didn't know they'd just fired the only person who could explain why their biggest supplier's termination letter was about to land in Marcus's inbox. Outside, the October wind cut through my shirt as I crossed the parking lot. My old Honda sat there like a faithful dog. I opened the door, set the box in the passenger seat, and sat for a moment without starting the engine. Breathing, thinking, not angry, not sad, just ready. If you've ever had to watch your loyalty be used against you, if you know what it's like to be punished for asking your worth, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the rest of this. I glanced in the rearview mirror at the building. I knew what was in those contracts. I knew exactly what would happen next, and I was fine with that. I didn't sabotage them. I just enforced what I wrote. I didn't turn the key right away. I just sat there with my hands on the wheel, watching my reflection in the rearview mirror. The building loomed behind me, glass catching the overcast sky, looking cold and sterile even on its best day. They'd taken my badge, my email, my paycheck. They hadn't taken what mattered. I let out one long breath. Then I turned the key, the Honda coughing to life like an old dog shaking off sleep. I backed out slow, watching the security guard in my mirror, arms crossed over his chest. Funny. He used to wave me in every morning. Now he couldn't even look at me. Leaving felt smaller than I expected. No yelling, no argument, just a checklist and a signature, and the slow walk out. Kelly had tried to make small talk on the elevator ride down, but she gave up after the first silence. HR people know when someone's past talking. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I let it ring twice before pulling it out. Block number. I didn't answer. I knew what that was. Marcus, or legal, wanting to make sure I remembered my NDA. As if I needed reminding. They'd crafted that thing so carefully. Half of it was unenforceable fluff, designed to scare junior analysts who didn't know better. But I knew better. I'd written entire compliance guides on vendor confidentiality. Hell, I'd written their vendor onboarding policy, clause by clause, including the one they never bothered to read carefully. I eased onto the street, traffic light turning green with that soft click. The city was gray and damp. October in Ohio didn't care about your career. People still had to get to work, or home, or wherever they went when they didn't have a job anymore. The box on the passenger seat rattled when I hit a pothole. Framed photo tilted. I reached over and righted it with one hand. My kid was smiling in that picture, missing a front tooth. Reminded me what all those late nights had been for. Funny how management always talked about loyalty, like it was a one-way street. For 5 years, I'd worked weekends to get vendor audits submitted on time. Stayed late to rewrite contract language so their procurement guys didn't trigger automatic indemnity increases. Took calls from suppliers in 3 time zones, all to keep the lights on and the production line moving. They never remembered that. They remembered one call with a recruiter, another buzz from my phone. Voicemail this time. I put it on speaker. Hi, Dean. This is Kelly from HR. I just wanted to follow up to ensure you understand the expectations around your confidentiality obligations. We, also need to remind you that any communication with current vendors should cease immediately. Please call me back to confirm you received this message. I smiled. Slow? They were worried. They should be, because they were right about one thing. Vendors were my specialty. I clicked the message away and drove in silence. Thinking, planning, not about revenge, not really. Just procedure. They'd given me a printed copy of my signed exit forms. Standard language. Termination for cause. Even though they'd handed me a severance package. Cute. That phrasing was a shield against unemployment claims. It was also a warning shot. A note to any future employer that I'd been disloyal. Didn't bother me. I already had an offer in my inbox. I just hadn't signed it yet. I pulled into my driveway. The autumn leaves crackling under my tires. Saturday there a moment. Engine ticking. Reached over and picked up the thumb drive in its baggie. Flipped it over in my fingers. They'd checked it before I left. Kelly had even logged it on her inventory sheet. They hadn't noticed it was empty. Just labeled, backup, in my handwriting. My real backup was in the cloud. Encrypted. Accessible anywhere. I walked inside, setting the box on the kitchen table. My wife wasn't home yet. Good. Didn't want to explain all this immediately. I opened my laptop, logged in, pulled up the vendor onboarding checklist. My checklist, with my initials at the bottom of every page. Clause 4.7 sat there in black and white, buried in the termination section. Simple, unambiguous. Either party may terminate this agreement with 90 days' notice, except in the event of non-compliance with onboarding requirements, which shall render this contract voidable at the vendor's discretion effective immediately. I read it twice. I remembered writing it late one night, coffee cold on my desk, making sure our vendors couldn't screw us with surprise terminations unless we were at fault. It was insurance. For both sides. They hadn't read it in years. Not since they cut the training budget and laid off my second in command. They'd failed their own onboarding audit last quarter. I knew it. Hell, I'd flagged it in red in my final monthly report. Marcus had signed off anyway. Too expensive to fix. Not urgent. My phone buzzed again. Email this time. From legal. Dean, per your exit interview, please acknowledge receipt of your confidentiality and non-compete obligations. Failure to do so may result in legal action. I closed it without responding. They thought the threat would scare me. I didn't want to destroy them. I didn't even want to hurt anyone. I just wanted to be valued. But they'd made sure I wasn't their problem anymore. And Clause 4,7? That wasn't a threat. It was a promise. They hadn't fired a disgruntled employee. They'd fired the only person who remembered how their contracts actually worked. I leaned back in my chair, watching the screen, and I started making a list of people who needed to see Clause 4.7. I closed the laptop and rubbed my temples. Clause 4.7 sat in my mind like a live wire, humming with potential I didn't want to touch too soon. The thing about compliance work is, it teaches you patience. Patience to read every line of a contract 3 times before signing. Patience to listen while management told you, not now, for the 5th straight quarter. Patience to sit quietly while HR escorted you out like a criminal. Tonight, I let that patience settle in my bones. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the kitchen ceiling, thinking about the list. It wasn't long. A handful of vendor contacts. People I'd onboarded personally. People who remembered my calls at midnight when their shipment got stuck at customs. People who trusted me. I didn't want to drag them into this. They were vendors, not hostages. But they had a right to know what Wexler and Drake had let slide. I opened the folder I'd carried home in the box. HR hadn't even noticed. Or they had, and didn't care. Inside was a stapled audit log I'd printed last week. Tittle in big black letters. Vendor onboarding compliance. Exceptions and deficiencies. My name was at the bottom as the preparer. Dated and signed. I ran my thumb over my signature. I hadn't intended for this to be evidence. It was supposed to be a warning. I flipped to the summary page. There it was. Highlighted in yellow marker. Non-compliance with onboarding verification requirements. Vendor retains right to immediate termination per Clause 4.7. Simple. Plain English. No legalese to hide behind. I could practically hear Marcus's voice in my head. Dean, do we really need to show them this? Let's keep the summary clean. They hadn't removed the clause. They'd just stopped talking about it. My phone buzzed again on the table. I didn't recognize the number. I let it go to voicemail. HR probably. Or legal. Or maybe Marcus himself. Suddenly realizing what he'd let walk out the door. I didn't care. I slid the audit packet aside and pulled out the old vendor onboarding checklist. My checklist. I designed it to be idiot-proof. 1 page. 15 steps. Clear boxes to tick. Sign-offs from legal. Sign-offs from procurement. Proof of insurance. Tax ID. Compliance certifications. I remembered training procurement staff on it. Some of them had hated me for it. Why do we need all this? It slows things down. Because skipping steps wasn't cheaper. It was just more expensive later. I smiled without humor. They'd learned that the hard way. I picked up the thumb drive. It clacked lightly against the ceramic mug on the table. HR had treated it like a potential grenade. All it held now was family photos. But the real stuff. Contracts. Checklists. Audit logs. Emails. Encrypted in the cloud. Accessible anywhere. Not for blackmail. I wasn't that stupid. But for clarity. For truth. I booted the laptop again. The fan whirred softly, like it was nervous about what I might ask it to do. I opened my contacts list. Names. Emails. Phone numbers. I hovered over the first one. A vendor I'd onboarded 2 years ago. We'd built their entire logistics pipeline with them. They'd grown from 5 employees to 50 since. They needed Wexler and Drake, but they didn't need the surprises the company had let pile up in that audit report. I wasn't looking to burn them. I wanted them to know the risk. Because if they found out the hard way, if they got stuck without a contract, if they lost their margin because Wexler couldn't legally supply them, that was on me. I closed the window without sending anything. Not yet. I exhaled slowly. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. The fridge motor kicked on in the background. That old, familiar hum of suburban stability. I'd spent years making sure I didn't rock the boat, telling myself being the reasonable one would pay off, believing that loyalty got rewarded eventually. What a lie. But even now, I felt no anger, only precision. They wanted me gone so badly they walked me out the door. They forgot what went with me. I reached for the audit log again. My fingers rested on the highlighted line. Clause 4,7. That clause wasn't a trap. It was a promise. To the vendors. To the people depending on clean deals. I picked up a pen and started writing a new list. Not of who to punish, of who deserved the truth. They called me disloyal. Fine. I wasn't loyal to them anymore. I was loyal to the work. To the system they'd tried to cut corners on. My phone buzzed once more. This time, I let it ring until it went silent. Some people think compliance is just about rules. They never understood it's about consequences. I underlined the first name on my list. Tomorrow, I'd make the first call. I stared at the list like it might rearrange itself. 5 names. 5 companies whose entire supply chain ran through Wexler and Drake. I didn't circle them, didn't star them, didn't draw any arrows. Just underlined each name once. Slow and deliberate. No rush. This wasn't revenge. This was disclosure. It's a strange thing. Realizing you know a company's secrets better than they do. Not just their contracts. Their dependencies. Who could walk if they had a reason? Who couldn't afford to blink? I set the pen down and picked up the vendor onboarding checklist. 15 boxes, most with my own initials in the corner. Procurement had complained about it for years. Overkill, they'd called it. I used to remind them, overkill is just what success looks like to risk managers. They didn't laugh, but it worked, until they stopped using it. Clause 4.7 was never about punishing vendors. It was about making sure we treated them fairly. Clear requirements. Consiste documentation. Accountability both ways. Fail to do it right. They could walk immediately. No payout. No penalty. I'd written that clause myself. Back when they still listened. I ran my fingers over the line I'd highlighted last night. Vendor retains right to immediate termination in event of non-compliance with onboarding requirements. Such polite language for what it actually meant. I leaned back in the chair, closed my eyes, remembered the last vendor meeting I'd sat through before they locked me out of strategy sessions. A cramped glass box of a room. Vendor rep tapping his pen on the table. So what's the real risk here, Dean? If we stop sending you this documentation, what actually happens? I'd smiled. Calm. Professional. You lose the right to terminate at will, and we lose our ability to enforce anything if things go south. Head snorted. Lawyers and their small print. Small print? It was always small print until it wasn't. I opened my eyes. The audit report lay next to the checklist. Printed in black and white. My initials scrawled at the bottom. I hadn't written it to be a weapon. It was a lifeboat. If anyone bothered to use it. I picked up my phone and flipped through old emails. One caught my eye. Subject line. Vendor onboarding exception. Orphaned. Dated 6 months ago. Marcus had been CC'd. So had legal. My own reply was still there. This is non-compliant per clause 4.7. Risk of termination for cause if not remediated. No one had replied. I closed the email app, tossed the phone gently onto the table. They'd ignored it then. Now they were hoping I'd ignore it too. I wouldn't. But I wasn't going to send out some scorched earth email blast. That wasn't my style. No, I'd call, one at a time, because you don't send a bomb. You show them the match. Let them decide if they want to light it. I picked up the pen again. Next to each underlined name, I wrote a short note. Logistics, high exposure, medical equipment, regulatory oversight, retail chain, thin margins, automotive, just-in-time risk, packaging, sole source. I knew these companies. I'd seen their vendor audit packets, their payment histories, their dependencies. They didn't need me to sabotage anything. They just needed to know the truth. I took a slow breath, because that was the hardest part. When you tell someone the truth they don't want to hear. I wasn't calling to ruin Wexler and Drake. I was calling to keep their partners from getting blindsided. They'd called me disloyal. But loyalty doesn't mean letting people drive off a cliff because you don't want to make them uncomfortable. I opened my drawer and pulled out the Clause 4.7 printout. Folded, edges worn from being handled too many times. My own handwriting in the margin from years ago. Failsafe. Protects both sides. I hadn't set a trap. I'd written a safeguard. They were the ones who decided not to maintain it. I put the printout on top of the audit report, stacked the onboarding checklist neatly beside it. These weren't weapons. They were disclosures. My phone buzzed once more. This time I picked it up. Blocked number. Ignored it. Again, I wasn't playing their game anymore. Instead, I clicked on the first contact. Vendor rep I'd known for 5 years. I didn't hit call. Not yet. Just stared at the number, memorizing it. Because tomorrow, I'd call them, and I'd explain exactly what Clause 4.7 meant for their business. I'd tell them what Wexler and Drake refused to admit. That loyalty wasn't about silence. It was about honesty. Some people think compliance is about red tape. It's really about making sure no one pretends they didn't know better. I closed the folder carefully, stacked it with precision, and I went to bed knowing the real work would start with the first call. I woke before dawn. Old habit. Compliance guys are used to early hours. Before the calls start. Before the urgent emails flood in. Before legal decides something's on fire. This morning felt different. Quiet, but charged. Like the pause before thunder. I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee cooling in front of me. Next to it lay the vendor list. 5 names underlined in blue ink. Beside that, Clause 4.7 printout. Folded twice. Edges soft from years of handling. Onboarding checklist with my initials on every line. Audit report. Summary page creased from me, thumbing it over and over. I didn't need to read them again. I knew every line. I wasn't calling to warn them because I owed Wexler and Drake anything. They'd made it clear they were done with me. But the vendors? They deserved to know the ground was about to give out under them. I took a slow sip, eyes on the paper. Vendors always got treated like an afterthought. Procurement wanted them cheap. Operations wanted them fast. Finance wanted them under budget. Nobody cared if the contracts were written on sand. Except me. I wiped a small coffee ring off the Clause 4.7 page with my thumb. Couldn't help it. Professional reflex. Even now, even fired, I didn't like seeing a mess on a clean document. My phone was on the table, screen dark. I tapped it awake. First contact was highlighted. Chris Nguyen, lead account rep at Swift Logics. We'd onboarded them 3 years ago. I'd been the one to walk them through every single line of the contract. They'd fought me on the onboarding docs. Dean, this is overkill. I'd smiled then. It's not for when things go right, Chris. It's for when they don't. He hadn't liked it, but he'd signed. And now Clause 4.7 was the only thing standing between his company and a total supply chain lockup if Wexler defaulted on compliance. I picked up the phone, stared at his name. My thumb hovered over call. I didn't want to do it, but it wasn't about want. I pressed the button, held it to my ear. 2 rings. 3. Click. Chris Nguyen. His voice was clipped. Busy. Chris, it's Dean Whitaker. Pause. Another pause. Dean. I heard you. Left Wexler? Nice corporate phrasing. I let the silence hang. Yeah, I said finally. Effective immediately, as they say. Damn. Sorry to hear it. He didn't sound sorry. He sounded cautious. I'm not calling about that, I said. I'm calling about your vendor agreement with them. Another pause. Is this appropriate, Dean? There it was. Corporate training kicking in. He was checking for liability. It's not about stealing clients, I said evenly. I'm not offering you an alternative supplier. I'm offering you clarity. Silence. He didn't hang up. I continued. You remember Clause 4.7, right? He snorted. Jesus. That thing? Yeah, I remember fighting you over it. I remember too, I said. Kept my voice calm. Professional. It's still in force. And last quarter, Wexler failed their own onboarding compliance. They signed off on a non-compliant process. It triggers immediate termination rights for you. More silence. I imagined him at his own kitchen table, blinking at his phone. Dean. That's serious. I know, I said. I wrote it. He exhaled hard. I don't even know what to say. You don't have to say anything, I told him. I'm not telling you what to do. I'm just telling you what's in your contract. It's your right to enforce it if you want. Or not. But you should know it's there. He was quiet for so long I thought he'd hung up. Finally, softly. Thanks. I nodded even though he couldn't see me. Check your copy, I said. Page 9. Bottom paragraph. Clause 4.7, he repeated, like he was tasting the words. Yeah. We didn't say goodbye. He just clicked off. I let the phone drop onto the table. Exhaled. 1 down. 4 to go. I picked up my pen and crossed Chris's name off the list. Not a triumph. Not a kill. Just a duty done. Because this wasn't about punishing Wexler. This was about making sure no one else got blindsided by their negligence. They'd fired me for being disloyal, for asking too many questions, for caring about what was buried in the small print. But someone had to read it. Someone had to enforce it. Some people think loyalty is silence. Real loyalty is telling the truth, even when no one wants to hear it. I set the pen down, flexed my fingers, and picked up the phone again, ready for the next call. My finger hovered over the next number. I let it hang there for a moment, just breathing. My coffee had gone cold hours ago. The rim of the mug stained with brown rings. The audit report was open beside me, clause 4.7 highlighted like a quiet accusation. The first call had been hard, but this one felt heavier. Karen Holt, vendor relations lead for a packaging supplier we'd onboarded right before I left. They were small. Leverage against them was brutal in negotiations. Wexler and Drake loved that. Could push payment terms to 90 days. Could insist on discount triggers. Could threaten to yank their orders if they pushed back too hard. They called it supply chain efficiency. I called it predatory procurement. I pinched the bridge of my nose, reminded myself why I was doing this. Because it wasn't about them anymore. It was about what happened to vendors who didn't know their rights. I pressed call. It rang 4 times before she picked up, breathless. Karen Holt. Karen. It's Dean Whitaker. A pause. Oh, Dean. Wow. Hi. Didn't expect to hear from you. Professional warmth, but cautious. Vendors learn to be cautious with Wexler people, even former ones. I know this is out of the blue, I said. I'm not calling from Wexler and Drake. I don't work there anymore. Yeah, I heard, she said. Soft, sympathetic, but guarded. I nodded to myself. Listen, I'm not selling you anything. I'm not pitching a competitor. I just need to tell you something about your contract. The line went silent. I waited. Finally, go on. Do you remember the vendor onboarding checklist I walked you through? The 15 steps? She let out a dry laugh. The one you wouldn't let a shortcut? Yeah, that one. I smiled faintly. Klaus 4,7. She didn't respond. It's the termination clause, I continued. If Wexler fails to meet onboarding compliance, you have the right to terminate effective immediately. No notice period. No penalty. I could hear her breathing shift. Paper rustling. She was looking for the contract. Dean, are you telling me they failed that? I'm telling you I flagged the failure in my last audit report. I signed it. Marcus signed it. They decided it wasn't urgent. Silence. They laid me off for disloyalty, I said, voice steady. They didn't want anyone asking about compliance exceptions. I think you deserve to know what's in your contract before you're blindsided. Karen's voice was tight. We've had shipment delays last month. They said it was a vendor change. No mention of non-compliance. I swallowed. That's why I'm calling. She didn't speak, but I heard a muffled curse. I leaned back in my chair, felt every vertebra press against the wood. Karen, I'm not telling you to do anything, but you need to be aware of your rights. Read your contract. Page 9. Bottom paragraph. A rustle of pages on her end. Afin d'excel. Clause 4.7. She read aloud, voice almost shaking. Yeah, another silence. But this one felt heavier. She finally spoke. Dean, I appreciate this. I don't know what we'll do, but thanks for the heads up. Of course, I said, because it was the only thing to say. We didn't say goodbye. She hung up quietly. I set the phone down with care. Let my hand rest there. Palm flat. Breathing. One more call done. 3 left. I reached for my pen. Crossed her name off the list. Ink felt heavy on the paper. It wasn't revenge. It was disclosure. I sat there for a minute, letting the silence fill the room. I remembered the onboarding meeting with her team, how she'd been the only one asking real questions, making sure her company wasn't signing anything they didn't understand, how she'd thanked me afterward for explaining the small print no one else would. That had been years ago. They'd all forgotten. But I hadn't. I picked up the clause 4.7 printout, now worn with coffee stains and thumb smudges. Read the line for the 100th time. Either party may terminate with 90 days' notice, except in event of non-compliance with onboarding requirements. It wasn't malicious. It was precise. It was mine. I closed the folder gently, lined up the checklist on top, set the pen down neatly beside it. I rubbed my eyes, exhaled. 2 calls down, 3 to go. I lifted the phone again, thumb scrolling to the next name, paused, because in that quiet moment, I knew someone at Wexler and Drake was noticing. They'd see the calls. They'd hear rumors. They'd know exactly who was telling the vendors what Clause 4.7 meant. And for the first time in days, I almost smiled. If you've ever watched someone punished for telling the truth, if you believe people deserve to know what they're signing up for, hit that subscribe button. These stories matter because they're real. I tapped the next number and hit call. The line rang twice before I pressed end call. Not ready yet. I set the phone down slowly. Watched the screen go dark. 2 names already crossed off the list. 3 left. My pen rested on the table next to the Clause 4.7 printout, the paper soft from folding and refolding. I ran a thumb along the margin. My old note in blue ink was still there. Failsafe. Protects both sides. They'd forgotten that, or chosen to. I picked the phone back up, scrolled to the next contact. Evan Price, automotive supply vendor. Just-in-time delivery. Any disruption meant idling production lines. I remembered the onboarding meeting. Evan had sat across the table, tapping a pencil while I explained the checklist. Dean, this is overkill. It's insurance. They'd all laughed then. Polite, forced. Management told them to sign. They signed. I sighed, thumb hovering over call. They deserve to know. I hit call. 3 rings. Click. Evan Price. Evan. It's Dean Whitaker. A pause. I could hear background noisome warehouse or plant floor. Dean? Well, that's a surprise. Yeah, I said. Sorry to call out of the blue. I'm not with Wexler anymore. He grunted. Yeah, word travels. HR walked you out, huh? I didn't react. Just let the silence do its work. He cleared his throat. So what's this about? I'm not here to sell you anything. I'm not with a competitor. I'm not poaching. I could hear him breathing, wary. I continued. I'm calling because you need to reread your vendor agreement. Page 9. Bottom paragraph. Clause 4,7. Silence. Jesus, he muttered finally. You're not serious. I'm very serious. He scoffed. That thing? You told us that was worst-case legal crap. I told you it was insurance. I corrected him. Against non-compliance. I flagged an onboarding failure last quarter. They signed off anyway. Long silence. No warehouse noise now. Just breathing. Dean, are you saying we can walk? Now? I didn't blink. That's not my call. I'm saying you have the right, if you choose to use it. He exhaled. God. We heard they were scrambling last week. Delays. We thought it was their vendor switch. I didn't say anything. Didn't need to. Hell, he said quietly. They really did it, huh? They chose not to fix it. He went silent. Why you telling me this? I didn't hesitate to. Because you deserve to know before you get blindsided. Your production lines can't eat Dachshund Day's notice. And they know that. He made a low noise in his throat. Anga. Or, understanding. Yeah. Okay. I'll talk to the team. That's all I wanted. He didn't say goodbye. Just ended the call. I set the phone down carefully. Third name. Crossed off. My pen left a heavy line. I let out a slow breath. It was getting easier. Or maybe just more necessary. I picked up the vendor list, scanned the last 2 names, my thumb tapping absently. In the quiet, I imagined the vendors talking. Bossingvord, Dean Whitaker called. He's telling people to read the contract. Clause 4,7. Wexler and Drake would hear soon enough. Marcus. Legal. Probably already getting calls they didn't want to answer. Good. They'd built the system, but they'd stopped respecting it. I glanced at my old onboarding checklist. The steps were so simple. Verification, certification, sign-offs, boxes you had to tick. They hadn't bothered, because it was cheaper not to. Until it wasn't. I flexed my fingers over the table. They felt tight, like they wanted to close around something. Instead, I grabbed the Clause 4.7 printout again. Smoothed the edge. Read the line one more time. Either party may terminate immediately in event of non-compliance. Simple, clean, fair. They'd accused me of being disloyal, of being a risk, because I'd remembered what we promised the vendors, because I refused to let them forget. I heard my phone buzz once. Voicemail, unknown number, probably Marcus, or HR, or legal. Didn't matter. I wasn't returning it. Some people think loyalty is keeping secrets. Real loyalty is making sure the truth can't be buried. I lifted the pen again, stared at the next name on the list. Paused, because in the quiet, I realized this wasn't going to stay quiet much longer. I set the pen down gently and started planning what I'd say when Marcus inevitably called back. My phone buzzed against the table again. I didn't pick it up. I just watched the screen light up, the unknown number flashing once before going dark. Another voicemail waiting to be ignored. I reached for my pen instead, crossed off Evan's name. 3 calls down, 2 left, but I didn't move to the next number yet. I leaned back in my chair, let my eyes go out of focus. The clause 4.7 printout lay to my left. Margin notes in my cramped handwriting. Coffee stain on the corner. It looked battered, used, honest. My phone buzzed again. This one showed blocked number. I didn't need to guess. Marcus, or Legal, or both. I didn't answer. Instead, I watched it ring itself out. Silence returning like a wave over wet sand. They'd love to get me on record. Dean, can we clarify the nature of these calls you're making to vendors? Polite, oficial, Legal's version of a velvet-covered hammer. I could hear Marcus's voice even without picking up. Dean, we just want to avoid misunderstandings. Dean, this is about professionalism. Dean, think about your reputation. I exhaled slowly. The irony was rich. They'd fired me for being disloyal, but they expected me to keep their secrets. They wanted me to forget the audit logs I'd written, the red flags I'd highlighted, the risk register entries they'd ignored. I closed my eyes, let myself remember the last strategy meeting I'd been invited to before they cut me out. Glass-walled conference room, Marcus at the head of the table, PowerPoint full of buzzwords, supplier optimization, margin expansion, right-sizing partnerships. I'd tried to speak. We're out of onboarding compliance on 4 of these contracts. If they audit, they can walk immediately. Marcus hadn't even looked at me. Let's stay focused on solutions, Dean. Translation. Shut up about the risk. The vendor reps in the meeting had shifted in their chairs. Not comfortable, not confident, but no one backed me. Not legal, not procurement. They all wanted the deal to close, wanted the bonus, and when it did, they sent me the final contract to archive. I'd filed it, with the checklist marked incomplete. Now they were pretending none of that mattered. That clause 4.7 was theoretical. A bluff. My phone buzzed again. Voicemail. I let it go. I picked it up just long enough to see the message count tick higher. 5 unheard voicemails. I didn't need to listen. I knew the tone. Dean, this is HR. Just a courtesy call to remind you of your obligations under your NDA. Dean, this is legal. We're concerned about potential interference with existing vendor relationships. Dean, please call back so we can clear this up professionally. Polite, measured, threatening in its careful phrasing. I set the phone down gently. They didn't want to sue me. Not really. That would mean discovery. Emails, audit logs, my red flags, my initials at the bottom of the risk assessments. But they wanted me quiet. I flexed my fingers once, then let them rest flat on the table. Silence. I picked up the vendor list again. 2 names left. Both smaller suppliers. Both deeply dependent on Wexler's orders. I felt a tightness in my chest, because these next calls wouldn't be easy. They'd be the ones who would feel the most fear. The big vendors had options. The small ones had families, payroll, leases, credit lines. Clause 4.7 was their out, but it was also a bomb under their cash flow, if they chose to use it. I wasn't here to push them, just to make sure they saw the fuse burning. I reached over and flipped the clause 4.7 printout again. Read the line for the 1,000th time. Either party may terminate with 90 days' notice, except in the event of non-compliance with onboarding requirements. It wasn't an accident. It was there to protect them. If Wexler wanted to break the rules, vendors had a right to walk away clean. Wexler forgot that part, or they pretended to. But I hadn't. My phone buzzed one more time. Buzzed. Buzzed. Stopped. I watched the screen go black. Marcus would call again. Of course he would. I was a liability now. Not because I was lying, but because I was telling the truth. Some people think the worst thing you can do is betray trust. They never think about what happens when you honor it. I set the printout carefully on top of the vendor list, straightened the pages, aligned the edges. My hand paused over the next name, because I knew exactly what I'd say when Marcus finally got me on the line. I closed my eyes and started rehearsing the words I'd waited years to say. I kept my eyes closed, let the words run through my head like a script. I didn't want to get caught off guard when Marcus finally called. Because he would. He was nothing if not predictable. He'd start polite. That careful, measured tone. Dean, I just want to clear up a few things. Dean, help me understand why you're doing this. Then he'd shift. Get serious. Dean, I'm not sure you appreciate the position you're putting yourself in. Dean, I need to remind you of your NDA obligations. The last time I heard him use that phrase was in a meeting about a vendor threatening to walk over payment terms. He'd leaned forward, interlaced his fingers, and said in that same even tone, I think they need to appreciate the position they're putting themselves in. It was a threat, dressed up like business. I opened my eyes and stared at the clause 4.7 printout on the table. Margin notes, yellow highlighter across the key line, the coffee stain in the corner. I'd kept it because it was honest. A record of the mess they pretended didn't exist. My phone buzzed. Screen lit up. Unknown number. Again, I didn't answer. I let it ring out and drop to voicemail, because I wasn't ready to talk until I'd rehearsed every word. Marcus, you don't get to tell me about obligations. You had obligations too. To the vendors. To the contracts you signed. They always like to throw the NDA in your face, like it was a gag order. I picked up the phone and flipped to the saved PDF of my own NDA. Highlighted phrase, employee agrees not to divulge confidential information except as required by law. Except as required by law. I'd written enough contracts to know that phrase was there for a reason. I wasn't disclosing pricing models, or customer lists, or intellectual property. I was reminding vendors of their rights under a signed, enforceable clause. That wasn't sabotage. That was enforcement. I smiled, but there was no humor in it. They'd trained me to see these things. They just never imagined I'd use it on them. My phone buzzed again. Another voicemail. I flipped it over on the table so the screen faced down, because I could already hear Marcus's voice in those messages. Careful. Friendly. Measured. Dean, this is just a courtesy call. Dean, we want to avoid any unnecessary legal escalation. Dean, I'm sure you understand how this looks. Oh, I understood. It looked like someone refusing to play along. It looked like the one person who remembered the rules refusing to pretend they didn't exist. I remembered the first time I'd written clause 4.7, late night at my old desk. Fluorescent lights buzzing, coffee cold. I hadn't written it as a trap. I'd written it as insurance. For both sides. Vendors hated it. Procurement rolled their eyes. Legal had signed off because I'd kept the language clean. But it was necessary. Because compliance wasn't about making friends. It was about making sure the rules applied when things went wrong. And things had gone wrong. Because they'd stopped caring. My phone buzzed again. Longer this time. Persistent. I didn't move. They wanted me to be scared. Or at least uncertain. But I wasn't uncertain. I knew exactly what I'd say when I picked up. Marcus, don't talk to me about loyalty. I wrote the clause you're hoping no one reads. You want to threaten me with an NDA? Let's do that. Let's pull the contracts. Let's pull the audit logs. Let's read the risk register together. They didn't want that. Because I'd signed every line. Initialed every page. Logged every risk. My name was at the bottom of every red flag they'd ignored. I flexed my fingers on the table. Watched the phone screen go dark again. The voicemails were stacking up. Polite HR disclaimers. Legal reminders. Polished threats. But no one was denying the truth. That was the part they couldn't say out loud. They couldn't admit they'd broken their own rules. They couldn't admit they'd chosen to. And I wasn't going to let them forget. I picked up the vendor list, pen resting on the last two names. Crossed off the third with slow, even pressure. 3 calls done. 2 to go. My phone buzzed again. I watched the caller ID. Blocked. My thumb hovered over answer. This time I was ready. I took one last deep breath and pressed accept. I pressed accept. Held the phone to my ear. Calm. Neutral. Dean. Marcus's voice was smooth. Measured. Corporate polished concern. Glad I finally reached you. I didn't answer right away. Silence is leverage. He cleared his throat softly. Dean, listen. I think we both know this has gotten complicated. Understatement of the year. I kept my tone flat. Complicated how, Marcus? I hesitated. Just a heartbeat. We're getting calls. Vendors. Confused. Saying you told them they could walk. I glanced at the clause 4.7 printout on the table. My own note in the margin. Fail. Safe. I told them to read their contracts. I said evenly. Dean, you know that's not the point. I let that hang. Because it was the point. He exhaled. That little gust of air that always came before he got serious. Look, I'm calling as a professional courtesy, to avoid misunderstandings. There it was. The first warning shot, dressed up in polite HR phrasing. You're no longer employed with us. We need you to stop contacting our vendors. I didn't blink. They're not your vendors, Marcus. They're contracting parties. They have rights. Dean, I'm not offering them a competitor. I'm not soliciting their business. I'm telling them what their contract says. You're interpreting legal language that isn't your place to interpret anymore. I almost laughed, but I didn't. I stayed cold. Funny. I wrote that language. Silence. He hadn't expected me to say it like that. Dean, be reasonable. Think about your reputation. There it was. The second phase. Polite threat. I said quietly. I'm thinking about the vendors who don't want to get blindsided when your onboarding failures come due. We've invested a lot in those relationships. You're damaging trust. I glanced at the vendor list. 3 names crossed off. 2 left. Trust? My voice stayed low. Flat. I flagged these compliance failures in the audit logs you signed. You ignored them. He didn't respond. Dean, I need you to understand the legal exposure you're creating for yourself here. I closed my eyes for half a second, controlled the wave of anger that threatened. Don't lecture me about exposure, Marcus. You're the one who let procurement skip half the onboarding requirements. You're the one who signed off on those exceptions. I was the one trying to keep you in compliance. He didn't like that. I could hear the shift in his breathing. We're not looking to escalate this, Dean. Of course not. Because escalation meant discovery. Emails. Audit logs. Clause 4.7 in black and white. I let the silence work. He filled it. Look, let's be adults here. We don't want to get legal involved. That's messy. Bad for everyone. I rubbed my thumb over the edge of the Clause 4.7 printout, feeling the crinkle where it had folded so many times. Then stop threatening me with NDA violations, I said. Silence. I pressed. Your own NDA says, except as required by law. They have a right to know their termination clauses. You can't enforce secrecy on compliance failures. He tried to recover. Dean, you know that's not what this is about. It's about professional respect. Professional respect. God. You mean silence. Dean. Marcus. I kept my voice calm. Measured. Lethal in its precision. I'm not lying to them. I'm not slandering Wexler and Drake. I'm telling them to read the contract you signed. If you don't like what's in Clause 4.7, maybe you shouldn't have left it in. He didn't speak. Because he couldn't argue that, I let him sit in the silence. Finally, he tried one last time. Dean, let's work this out. Off the record. What do you want? I felt something go cold and clean inside me. What do I want? I stared at the vendor list. The last 2 names. Uncrossed. Waiting. I spoke softly. Deliberate. I want them to know the truth before you use them up and walk away. I want them to have the choice you didn't give them. He was silent. Breathing. Thinking. Calculating. Dean, you're making this very hard. I didn't smile. Didn't flinch. That's the idea. I heard the exhale. Frustrated. Defeated. We'll be in touch. Click. Call ended. I set the phone down gently. Watched the screen go dark. Some people think compliance is red tape. It's really the last promise you can make to the people who trust you. I picked up the pen and hovered over the next name on the list. Ready to make the next call. I held the pen over the next name on the list. Didn't cross it off yet. Just stared at it. My hand felt heavy. Marcus's voice was still in my head. You're making this very hard. He was right. This wasn't easy. Not for them. Not for me. I exhaled slowly. The Clause 4.7 printout was to my left. Edges curled. Margin notes crowding the text. Coffee stain brown and ugly. Honest. I reached over and smoothed the paper with my palm. Like that would make any of it simpler. Termination for cause without penalty. Simple words. Sharp as a razor when used. I picked up the phone. Scrolled to the next contact. Hesitated. Because I knew exactly what this call would mean. This vendor was small. Family run. Lean margins. If they walked, they'd lose a big customer. But if they stayed, they'd eat the cost of Wexler's failures. Clause 4.7 was their out. But it was also their risk. That's the part Marcus never understood. He thought I was trying to burn the company down. Thought I wanted revenge. But revenge was easy. This was harder. I tapped call. 2 rings. Click. Angela Carter. Her voice was clipped. Professional. But tight. Angela. It's Dean Whitaker. Silence. I waited. Let it breathe. Dean. I heard you left Wexler. That's true. I guess I know why you're calling. I stayed calm. Neutral. Professional. I'm not calling to recruit you. I'm not selling you anything. I'm not offering you an alternative supplier. I know. Quiet. Heavy. I heard papers shuffling on her end. Probably the contract. Maybe already turned to the right page. Clause 4.7. I said anyway. Soft. Like a confession. Termination for cause without penalty. She recited. Yeah. You flagged us, didn't you? Before you left? I didn't lie. Yes. Another pause. Longer. You know what happens if we pull the plug? I did. Of course I did. You lose a big chunk of revenue. I said calmly. Half our staff, Dean. Maybe more. My grip on the phone tightened, but my voice stayed level. I know. Then why the hell are you calling me? Her voice cracked. Anger. Fear. Desperation. I swallowed. Because this was the part I hated. Because you deserve to know before they use it on you. Silence. What? They're not going to fix onboarding. They're not going to renegotiate. When cash flow gets tight, they'll invoke the clause themselves. They'll drop you with 24 hours notice. No penalty. No payout. She didn't answer. I'm not telling you to leave, I said. I'm telling you to read your contract. Plan for it. Negotiate from a position of knowing. Don't let them blindside you. I heard her breathing. Ragged. Trying to calm herself. We can't afford to lose them. I closed my eyes. Then used the clause as leverage. Demand compliance. Demand fair terms. That's what it was written for. Another silence. They'll hate you for this. I let out a tiny breath. A laugh with no humor in it. They already do. She didn't reply. But she didn't hang up. I could hear shuffling papers. A pen scribbling something. Finally. Thanks for the warning. That's all I can give you, I said quietly. Yeah. I know. Click. Call ended. I let my arm drop to the table. Phone landing with a dull clack. My hand was shaking. Just a little. I picked up the pen. Crossed her name off the list. 4 down. 1 left. I sat there in the quiet. Surrounded by evidence. Vendor list with 4 heavy black lines. Clause 4.7 printout covered in annotations. Old onboarding checklist with my initials on every line. My name was on every risk flag they'd ignored. This wasn't revenge. This was memory. Institutional memory they couldn't delete from a server or shred in HR. I was the one who remembered the rules when they forgot. Or pretended to. Some people think telling the truth is easy. It isn't. It's just necessary. I exhaled. Long. Heavy. And picked up the phone again. I scrolled to the final name on the list. Steadying myself for the last call. My thumb rested on call. Last name on the list. I didn't move for a full minute. Because this was the last one. The final disclosure. No excuses left after this. I glanced at the vendor list on the table. 4 names crossed out in black ink. 1 left. My pen ready. Waiting. The clause 4.7 printout lay beside it, battered and marked up like a legal confession. Termination for cause, without penalty. I'd written that line. Protected it from legal edits. Refused procurement's demand to remove it. Because I'd seen too many small vendors get crushed under preferred partner status that meant nothing when the balance sheet tightened. I remembered late nights with legal. Arguing. Explaining. Begging them to understand that onboarding wasn't window dressing. That was when I still thought it mattered to them. Now they wanted me silent. They wanted me complicit. I inhaled, slow and deep. Exhaled. Pressed call. 3 rings. A rustle. A wary voice. Hello? Michael? It's Dean Whitaker. Silence. A second of static. Then guarded recognition. Dean. Okay. Heard you left. I did. They said. Not much about it. I almost smiled. Of course they didn't. I'm not with them anymore. I'm not with anyone. I'm just calling you as the guy who walked you through your onboarding 3 years ago. Silence. Processing. Dean. I'm not sure I want to hear this. I let the quiet fill in the rest. Because he wasn't wrong. Finally I said, Clause 4,7. He swore under his breath. Shit. Page 9. Bottom paragraph. Termination for cause without penalty. If onboarding compliance is breached. He let out a ragged breath. They messed up onboarding? They failed it. Signed off anyway. I flagged it. They buried it. Another silence. Deeper. Heavier. Jesus. We've got 2 trucks going out this week. They're half our month. I kept my voice steady. Professional. I know. So what the hell do you want me to do, Dean? Just pull the plug? Tank my own company? I exhaled. Shook my head even though he couldn't see. I'm not telling you to do anything. I'm telling you to know. Because they sure as hell won't warn you when they decide you're too expensive. He was quiet, breathing harsh. You think they'd do that? I closed my eyes. Remembered that last strategy meeting. Marcus with his spreadsheet. The line item that just said, vendor optimization. They don't think twice about it, I said flatly. He didn't argue. You always gave a damn about this stuff, he muttered. Not a compliment. Not quite an insult. Just a truth. He still do. He snorted. Yeah, I guess you do. Silence again. Weight settling. Thanks for the heads up. That's all I can give you. Yeah, I know. Click. Call ended. I let the phone drop to the table. My hand still curled around it. White-knuckled. The vendor list waited. I picked up the pen. Drew one last deliberate line through the final name. 5 calls. 5 truths told. No illusions left. I sat back. Exhausted. Not triumphant. Not satisfied. Just finished. My eyes landed on the clause 4.7 printout one last time. Margin notes all over it. Coffee stain like a badge. Fail-safe. That was what I'd called it. Not a weapon. Not sabotage. Just protection for when people forgot what trust actually meant. Because they always did. I didn't sabotage them. I enforced what I wrote. I gathered up the papers slowly. Vendor list. Checklist. Clause 4,7. Stacked them neatly. Aligned the edges. Symbolic. Ritualistic. A last act of compliance. I wasn't sure if any of them would use it. Some wouldn't dare. Some would negotiate. Some would walk. But none of them would be blindsided. Not on my watch. Because truth wasn't always easy. But it was necessary. Some people think compliance is about rules. It's really about promises. I set the stack aside. Exhaled. Let my hand rest on the table. Tired, but clear. If you've ever seen someone punished for telling the truth if you think people deserve to know what they're signing up for, hit that subscribe button. Because these stories matter. And so do the people in them. Tell me, what would you do if you were me? Or them? Because sometimes the hardest choice is just not lying.